I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
From feel-good musicals to slapstick comedy to the rise of method acting and blockbuster epics, cinema in the 1950s had it all. Join us in today's video where we'll be exploring the decade that gave us some of the most influential films in cinema history. Let's get into it. This is Hollywood Bio. Although the 1950s were a huge success in cinema history, the film industry was going through a number of changes and faced an array of challenges. The first of which was the rise of television. Television became increasingly more accessible in the 1950s and provided a direct threat to cinema ticket sales. When the decade began, a mere 9% of households in America owned a television set. However, an increase in disposable income after the war years saw an increase in the consumer market. By 1955, more than half of all American households had at least one television set, and by the end of the decade, television ownership had risen to over 85%. Hollywood film companies saw this upward trend and decided to diversify their business by making television programs as well as films. With a significant decline in ticket sales at the box office, production companies had even more reason to get involved in television programming. There are, however, other reasons for the decline in theatre ticket sales. Many young couples were deciding to move their families to newer and bigger homes in the suburbs, which meant they were further away from downtown movie theatres. With the increase in suburbanisation, people were also enjoying other leisure activities that were in direct competition with the cinemas. The suburbs also offered audiences an alternative viewing experience in the form of the drive-in cinema. By the early 1950s, the number of drive-in cinemas across America had risen from 155 to over 4,000. They became popular with young families as they were affordable and had the ability to accommodate everyone in the family, including babies. Many of them offered free entry for children and included a playground and concession stands. Drive-ins were also a popular date night option for young couples and a place in which youths enjoyed socialising with their friends. Two other major challenges for the film industry were the Paramount Decree and the Hollywood Blacklist. The Paramount Decree was signed in the late 40s and had a big impact on Hollywood studios from 1950 onwards. Prior to the signing of the decree, film studios owned their own theatre chains in which they would run their own films. However, when the government accused the 8 major film studios of monopolising film distribution, the decree was signed, forcing a separation of studios and their theatre chains, making way for smaller and independent film studios to break into the market. The industry was also in turmoil when the development of the Hollywood Blacklist caused friction behind the scenes. The blacklist involved banning communists and their sympathisers from working in the film industry. The first group of workers called to testify became known as the Hollywood 10, which consisted of directors, screenwriters, and producers. They were imprisoned for being in contempt of court for their refusal to answer questions pertaining to their possible involvement with communism. The blacklist caused tension behind the scenes as many industry workers, including some actors, were strongly against the committee responsible for the investigations, while workers who did provide testimony were not openly supported by their peers. Just because there were tensions behind the scenes and an obvious decline in cinema-goers during the 50s does not mean there was a decline in the quality of films. In fact, far from it. Let's take a look at some of the films, actors and directors from the decade that are still so beloved by audiences today. All About Eve, 1950.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
In the record-breaking All About Eve, Bette Davis once again showed the world her natural talent in a commanding performance as Margot, an ageing Broadway star who is manipulated and betrayed by an ambitious young woman named Eve, played by Anne Baxter. The film is historic in its recognition of female talent. It is the only film to have received 4 Oscar nominations for female roles, the most of any film. And it also holds the record for the most Oscar nominations for a film, with 14 in total, matched only by Titanic and La La Land. In total, it won 6 of those 14 nominations, including Best Picture. Rebel Without a Cause, 1955.
You're tearing me apart!
It was the film that spoke to a whole generation and represented a very distinct divide between teenagers and their parents. James Dean in the iconic red jacket captivated audiences, while Natalie Wood and Sal Mineo were equally as impressive. But Rebel Without a Cause actually received mixed reviews from the critics. Most agreed, however, that James Dean's performance was outstanding. Sadly, James Dean would never see how successful the film became, as he was killed in a car accident just a month prior to its release. Incidentally, Natalie Wood and Sal Mineo also died prematurely, with Natalie Wood drowning at the age of 43, while Sal Mineo died at 37 after being attacked by a stranger. The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957.
What have I done?
One of the most successful films of the decade came in 1957 with The Bridge on the River Kwai. Based on the 1952 book by Pierre Boulez, the film was the highest-grossing film of that year and won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture and a Best Actor award for Alec Guinness for his role as Colonel Nicholson. Interestingly, the producer originally wanted Spencer Tracy for that role, but Tracy, who had read the book, believed the part needed to be played by an Englishman. Music. Gene Kelly. When it comes to musicals, it's hard to ignore the sheer talent of Gene Kelly, and the 1950s saw him perform 2 of his best roles. Esther Williams. For many, the thought of musicals in the 1950s also brings to mind Esther Williams and her beautifully choreographed synchronized swimming. A professionally trained swimming champion, she became known as America's Mermaid due to her success in aqua musicals. She has been quoted as saying that the water was her favourite co-star. The musical subgenre was not without its dangers, however, with Esther breaking several bones while shooting swim sequences and very nearly drowned when she was unable to find a trapdoor exit underwater. The Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals were also big in the 50s, with South Pacific, Carousel, Oklahoma and The King and I all being released during the decade. Yul Brynner actually won the Best Actor Oscar for his role in The King and I. Also notable in this genre was Leslie Caron in An American in Paris and Gigi. Triple Threat's Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby entertained in High Society, also featuring Louis Armstrong. Marilyn Monroe meshed music with comedy in the films Some Like It Hot and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Judy Garland once again showed her talent in one of the many iterations of A Star is Born. There was also a subgenre of musical westerns in the 50s, with films like Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, Annie Get Your Gun, and of course who could forget Calamity Jane, starring Doris Day in one of her most recognisable roles. When it came to pure westerns, however, one of the most recognisable actors was John Wayne. Of the 80 westerns he starred in, his personal favourite was The Searchers in 1956. He played American Civil War veteran Ethan Edwards and loved the film so much that he actually named his son Ethan as an homage to the character. According to the American Film Institute, The Searchers is the best film in the Western genre. One of the most successful westerns of the decade was High Noon, with 4 Oscar wins including Gary Cooper for Best Actor and an additional 3 nominations including Best Picture. Gary Cooper's casting in the film was called into question given he was 51 at the time and the character was only meant to be 30, and his on-screen wife was played by Grace Kelly, who was only 21 at the time. Ultimately, Gary Cooper would be praised for his performance, and it was considered his big comeback after a few years where his career appeared to be in decline. The film lost out on the Best Picture Oscar to film The Greatest Show on Earth, which is now considered to be one of the biggest upsets in the awards history. Other notable westerns from the decade were George Stevens' films Shane, starring Alan Ladd in the title role, and Giant, with an all-star cast including Elizabeth Taylor, James Dean and Rock Hudson. Film noir continues.
Thank you, Sergeant.
That wasn't very sporting, using real bullets.
After its emergence in the 40s, the film noir genre continued into the 50s, and by the end of the decade it had gone through an evolution of sorts. The reasons for this include the introduction of colour film and other advancements in technology, the changing social and political climate, and the rise of independent film companies meant that filmmakers could afford to be a bit more experimental in their work. There is some debate as to when film noir ended, if at all, or if it simply evolved into a subgenre of neo-noir, but many would agree that the 1950s still managed to produce some of the best film noirs, including Kiss Me Deadly, Touch of Evil, Sudden Fear and Sunset Boulevard. Directors: William Wyler. With such an impressive filmography, we really could have mentioned William Wyler in any of our decade videos, with his work beginning in the 20s all the way through to the 60s. We'll mention him here, however, due particularly to his film Ben-Hur in 1959, which earned him an Oscar for Best Director. The film actually won a total of 11 Oscars, making it one of 3 films with the most Academy Awards, tied only with Titanic and Lord of the Rings. Ben-Hur was also the highest grossing film in the US for the entire decade. Many actors credit William Wyler as part of their success. Sir Laurence Olivier said that Wyler taught him how to act on camera, while Bette Davis claims Wyler was responsible for making her a star. All in all, he directed 31 actors in their Oscar-winning performances, the most of any director. Alfred Hitchcock. It's hard to ignore the huge legacy of Alfred Hitchcock with his suspenseful thrillers, complex characters, and twist endings. By the 1950s, Hitchcock had already developed an impressive filmography. He began the decade in the film noir genre with movies Stage Fright and Strangers on a Train, and ended the decade with action thriller North by Northwest, starring Cary Grant, whom Hitchcock had stated was his favourite actor to work with. In fact, Hitchcock had a tendency to favour particular actors and actresses and worked with them several times. This was evident in the 50s, with Grace Kelly appearing in Dial M for Murder, Rear Window and To Catch a Thief. Another favourite of Hitchcock's was James Stewart, who also starred in Rear Window, as well as The Man Who Knew Too Much and Vertigo. Some actually regard Vertigo as one of Hitchcock's best films. It has earned itself a place in the top 10 American films of all time, according to the American Film Institute, and was listed as their best mystery film. We'll also discuss the continuing success of Alfred Hitchcock in our video on the 60s. Although many directors who came after him, including Spielberg, Scorsese, and Tarantino, credit him as being a huge influence on their work, at the time Hitchcock was not recognised for his talents and never won an Oscar for his directorial work. When watching an Alfred Hitchcock film, don't forget to look out for the man himself, as he made a habit of making a cameo in each of his films. Ida Lupino. Ida Lupino paved the way for female directors in a typically male-dominated profession, and was the first female to direct a film noir with the film The Hitchhikers in 1953. An established actress herself, Lupino was a forward thinker, often complaining that she was bored on set while others were doing the fun work. As an actress, she was selective about her roles and was even put on suspension from her contract with Warner Brothers, when she refused particular roles because they were poorly written and beneath her. She eventually left the studio and signed with 20th Century Fox, but before doing so, she used her time on suspension as an opportunity to observe what goes on behind the camera. She learnt the craft of filmmaking, editing, and producing, and ultimately became a savvy businesswoman. Other directors of note during this decade were John Huston, who directed The African Queen, and Billy Wilder, who directed Sunset Boulevard and Sabrina. Before we get into the actors and actresses of the decade, may we ask that you give this video a thumbs up, and if you enjoy entertainment history, then please subscribe for more videos like this. Any way that you can interact with this video lets the YouTube algorithm know what kind of content you enjoy, and it would really help us as well. Subscription is free and you can always change your mind later. The actors.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody.
While many of the great actors from the 1940s continued to have significant success in the 50s, the decade also saw a new wave of talent arise. This new generation of actors, including the likes of James Dean, Marlon Brando, Paul Newman and Montgomery Clift, introduced the world to a new kind of screen performance known as method acting. The method involved an actor understanding the internal motivations of a character so that they could embody them rather than just represent them. The more seasoned actors found it off-putting when a scene partner would adopt this style of acting, and many directors found it challenging. But audiences all over the world responded to the emotive performances it produced. The style was popularised by Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio in New York and was based on the teachings of Konstantin Stanislavski. We also discuss this in our James Dean biography, which we'll link for you if you'd like to watch it. A big supporter of the method acting movement was director Elia Kazan, who was also a co-founder of the Actors Studio. He directed some of the most famous method actors in the 50s, including Marlon Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront, and he directed James Dean in East of Eden. Alongside Brando and Dean as the first major method actors was Montgomery Clift. While Brando and Dean's performances were often intense, Clift was more subtle and nuanced. His performance in From Here to Eternity was a prime example of this and earned him a nomination for the Best Actor Academy Award. Also notable is Paul Newman's performance in Somebody Up There Likes Me. We'll talk more about Paul Newman in the 60s, but it is interesting to note that Newman's parts in both Somebody Up There Likes Me and The Left-Handed Gun had originally been awarded to James Dean, but was subsequently given to Newman after Dean's untimely death. As usual, there are too many talented actors to name them all in this video, but we would like to make note of Rock Hudson. He was the quintessential tall, dark and handsome leading man of the 50s, but it did take Rock Hudson a while to find his feet as an actor. In fact, during filming of his first movie, he took 38 takes to say just one line. By 1956, however, he'd certainly become a more established actor when he earned himself an Oscar nomination for his role in Giant, alongside Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean. Interestingly, he and Dean had an intense dislike for one another. Other notable mentions are Tony Curtis, Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, Ernest Borgnine, and the dynamic duo of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. The actresses.
You know, if you really want to get upset, go out and see the number she's going to do next.
Marilyn Monroe. During the 50s, societal norms were being questioned, and people began to challenge what was considered inappropriate. And so, despite the production code still being in action, stars like Marilyn Monroe began to find favour with audiences for their exuding sexuality and sultry good looks. Monroe made 23 films in the 50s, including Some Like It Hot with Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon, and The 7-Year Itch, which gave the iconic image of Marilyn in a white dress standing over a subway vent. Elizabeth Taylor. For Elizabeth Taylor, this was one of her most successful decades, although her career spans over many, as she starred in multiple box office hits and earned herself 3 Academy Award nominations for Best Actress in a Leading Role. With her piercing blue eyes, she captivated audiences in films such as A Place in the Sun, Ivanhoe, Suddenly Last Summer, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge paved the way for women of colour in Hollywood when in 1955 she became the first African American to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress in a Leading Role. This was for her performance in Carmen Jones. She became an overnight sensation and was soon turning down supporting parts in favour of leading roles. She was also the first African American on the cover of Life magazine. Her film Island in the Sun pushed the limits of the production code, but it was a huge success despite some controversies surrounding its subject matter. At the end of the decade, she starred in Porgy and Bess alongside Sidney Poitier. Another groundbreaking actor who we will discuss in our video on the 60s. Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly was admired for her poise and sophistication, which many young stars that followed her tried to emulate. Not only was she beautiful, but she had the talent to match. Often cast as the young wife to male lead actors who were much older than her, Grace Kelly made 13 films as well as several television shows in the 1950s. Although well known for her roles in Alfred Hitchcock films, she also starred in The Country Girl in 1954, which earned her the Oscar for Best Actress in a Leading Role. In 1956, she completed her final project as the socialite Tracy Lord in High Society, before she left Hollywood to marry the Prince of Monaco. Other notable actresses of the 50s were Ava Gardner, Kim Novak, Natalie Wood, and Lauren Bacall. Audrey Hepburn also made a name for herself during this decade, however we will discuss her in our video on the 60s. All in all, cinema in the 1950s really had something for everyone, and the quality films it produced are still loved by so many today. So, what do you think about this decade in cinema history? As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts, so head on over to the comments section and join the conversation about your favourite films, writers, directors and actors. We may not have mentioned some of your favourite actors in this video, but we do hope you understand that we simply can't include everything in just one video. If you'd like us to delve deeper into anything we've mentioned in today's video, feel free to let us know in the comments section. We are always happy to hear your suggestions and requests.
But you don't understand, Osgood. I'm a man.
Well, nobody's perfect.
Thanks for watching Hollywood Bio, and we'll see you in the next video.